made. This is Boom Bust, and these are some of the stories that we're tracking for you today. First up, we're looking at Janet Yellen's first public appearance as chairwoman of the Federal Reserve. Now, this comes following a two-day meeting of the Fed's policymaking committee, and Yellen will hold this first public press conference in her new role on Wednesday. And we're talking about what she might be saying during that press conference. You won't want to miss it. Then we have Catherine Austin Fitts on today's show. Fitts is publisher of the Solari Report and founder of Solari Investment Advisory Services. She sits down with me to discuss the decline of the old economic order and the birth of the new. Exciting stuff. And in today's Big Deal, Edward Harrison and I are discussing a tale of two counties. We're bringing you another angle to the importance of wage growth here in the U.S. It all starts right now. Yellen's style of communication will take center stage Wednesday as the chairwoman of the Federal Reserve makes her first press conference, in that role, that is. Now, this comes following a two-day meeting starting Tuesday. Yellen will lead her first assembly of the Fed's policymaking committee. That starts again on Tuesday. But my view here is that the immediate challenge confronting Yellen is overhauling the Fed's forward guidance for short-term interest rates. The Fed has been gradually pulling back on its bond buying, and it's widely expected to announce Wednesday that it will keep buying $55 billion in treasuries and mortgage-backed securities. Now, that's down from the $65 billion it purchased in March and the $85 billion every single month of last year. That is, unless the economic outlook changes sharply, which it could, given all that's going on around the world. Now, Fed officials have said that they intend to end purchases in the fall of 2014. However, Fed officials have been much less clear about their effort to suppress borrowing costs for businesses and consumers, not just by holding short-term interest rates near zero, but by also convincing investors that rates will remain low for the foreseeable future. Now, in December of 2012, the Fed said that it intended to keep short-term interest rates near zero, or at least as long as unemployment remained above 6.5%. At the time, it was at 7.9%. That's unemployment. Now, officials have since concluded that the rapid fall in unemployment overstates the labor market's recovery, and the unemployment rate fell to about 6.7% in February, which obviously was uncomfortably close to the Fed's stated 6.5% threshold. Now, again, the real question remains, what is Yellen going to say about forward guidance? Well, we will be waiting with bated breath. Austin Fitts was managing director and a member of the board of directors at venerated white shoe Wall Street firm Dillon Read. Now, this is before she became Assistant Secretary of Housing at the Department of Housing and Urban Development during the first Bush administration. Since leaving government, Austin Fitts has become increasingly aware of risks in the global financial system and political economy. She has made it her mission to reach out to various people via the internet. This helps her reach a wider array of citizens than she ever thought possible before. Now, today, she talked to me about the transition from what she calls Global 2.0 to Global 3.0. Take a look. Now, Catherine, having looked at your various commentaries and presentations on the internet, the overarching theme that stood out to me was this concept of yours that there is a world that is dying and a new one that's being born. And that, as we as individuals have to figure out how to be a greater part of this new world that you say is being born. So this very, very macro concept, can you explain it to us and for our audience, please?
Sure. For the last 2 decades, we've had an unprecedented amount of capital moved out of the developed world into the emerging markets, and then out of what I call the industrial economy and into a networked economy. And we are watching reinvestment now in the integration of new technology into very traditional infrastructure in the heartland of the country in the United States, but all around the world. And as it happens, you see, astonishing change. For example, in the stock market, we see companies that are failing rapidly and other companies that are shooting up and growing at dramatic speed. So you have this shift of the investment from one, literally, the industrial economy to a new networked economy, and it's the change is quite remarkable, and I think it's going to be more remarkable. And in the process, you go back and forth in the economy, and you hear some people saying, oh, it's the end of the world, and other people saying everything's wonderful. And the reality is, we're experiencing tremendous divergence, and in some areas it's terrible, and in other areas it's wonderful. And we need a picture of seeing that, and it's a shift, and it's a big one.
Catherine, is this new world being born kind of created out of the old, or do you envision them as two separate economic worlds entirely?
No, I think, well, first of all, it's certainly being created out of the old, because the industrial economy created the capital, and in some cases has been harvested to do the capital. So the industrial world has incubated it. And unfortunately, the painful part of this is, many of the people who incubated that capital are now being left behind. But if you look at the new technology and the application of that technology, what we're seeing, to give you an example, in the 90s, when you talked about new technology, people thought of the ring around Boston or Silicon Valley. Now what you're talking about is integrating that technology into the fundamental infrastructure. I call it the digital heartland. So into the railroads, into the roads, into the autos. So it's really getting into integrating the technology in the day-to-day business of how we live.
Catherine, what kinds of macro forces inhibit societies and individuals from leaving dying economic models and signing up for new ones?
Well, Erin, that's a great question. We all tend to hold on to what we know. And I think if there's anything I could stress to everyone, what we all need to do is we just need to keep learning. For many decades, I was an investment banker, and then one day I woke up and I said, oh, the world changed. I need to become an investment advisor. So we need to keep learning, and we need to be entrepreneurial about always staying useful. So if you're in a job or you're running a business and you're no longer useful because the world has changed, then you need to shift. And so to me, utility is the pathway that we can all follow. But I would say if you look at all the changes that are upon us, particularly as a result of new automation, I think, we're only 10% of the way through this change that we're going into. And so it's very, very important to just keep learning.
Now, can you give me and our viewers some specifics about how one should prepare for this new world? Essentially, what should someone major in if they want to be a competitive force? And who and what will succeed in this new world?
Well, that's a good question, because if you look at the curriculum of many universities, they're no longer appropriate. I would say one of the most important things to understand about a network world, for many years, the U.S. consumer market was the biggest consumer market, and then the European Union came together, and then North America was the biggest consumer market. Last year, do you know how many smartphones shipped?
Tell me, I don't know the number.
1 billion smartphones shipped.
Wow.
So we now have almost 2 billion people online, either through smartphones or tablets. And we now have a new consumer market that is bigger than anything we've ever conceived of. It's called people on smartphones. So the App Store at Apple in December had $1 billion of sales just at the App Store. And they're now getting more sales at the App Store coming from Asia than North America. So it's not surprising we see a new CEO at Microsoft whose background is Indian. So what we're talking about is a fundamental reorganizing. Just as in the 90s, we globalized labor for production, now we're globalizing and reorganizing the consumer. And a lot of that is happening online. If you drive around America, what you'll see is, the shopping malls are losing business, and next to the shopping mall, you see growing up big trucking and intermodal facilities, because more and more of the goods and services are being delivered by courier or by mail, from online shopping.
Right. Now, how does the present central banking / fiat currency model fit into your model?
Well, I think the central banking, what I call the central banking warfare model, has been going on for 500 years. So the central banks print money, and then the military makes sure that various folks take it. And that central banking warfare model is we're coming to the end of that game, and that was part of what rebalancing the economy and sort of moving investment into the emerging markets was about. And it's part of why we see such an effort to get every nation around the world sort of into the central banking model. But several things have to happen in the financial system to evolve that model, if you will. One is we're seeing countries all around the world build stock markets. And it's just really been in the last 10 years, Erin, that you and I can, go long Singapore, short Hong Kong. So part of this is securitizing the equity, but part of it is clearly moving to a more global currency. We have a lot of concern about how the reserve currency works. And I think over the next 10 to 20 years, you're going to see a much more global currency evolve.
Can you talk to me a little bit more about what global currency you think will evolve? Do you think it'll be something like a cryptocurrency today, like a Bitcoin?
Well, it depends on whether politics win or markets win. I think if markets win, what the market would like is to have lots of different currencies. There's a tremendous market demand for sort of local and place-based currencies or sector currencies, so things like Bitcoin. You see the central banks wanting to control and have something that they can use, and I think what the G20 want is a variety of different relationships they can use to sort of rebalance and balance trade. So my expectation is we're going to go towards more of a wholesale system, whether it's the IMF SDR, and then more sort of local currencies. But we're going through a period where the central banks have to compete with what the market wants to do. If the politics win out, then we're going to see the G7 central banks really dominate and control, but it's going to be a lot less dynamic economy.
Time now for a very quick break, but stick around because when we return, more from my interview with Catherine Austin Fitts. And in today's Big Deal, Edward Harrison and I are discussing how life expectancy and wage growth correlate here in the U.S. Some interesting stuff. You won't want to miss it. And as we go to break, here are a look at some of your closing numbers at the bell. Stick around.
Patients are force-fed. Explosion near the finish line of the Boston Marathon.
More than 1,000 people have gathered.
What is the latest that you're hearing about the number of victims?
We welcome Erin and Abby Martin, two of the terrific hosts on the RT network.
Boom Bust, it's going to give you a different perspective.
Give me one stock tip.
Oh, never. I'll give you the information, you make the decision.
Tell me about how breaking the set works.
It's a revolution of the mind, it's a revolution of ideas and consciousness.
Are you frustrated with the system?
Yeah, extremely.
Your politics would be described as angry.
I think I'm a strong female.
Are you single?
I've got a quote for you. Let's make it tea time. Stay away from that story. Let's get this guy elected. Let's smear that guy. Instead of working for the people, politicians and the mainstream media are working for each other. Bribery, staged events, bias, and propaganda. I think I'd rather play alone.
Back now with more from Catherine Austin Fitts, and we pick up the second part of our conversation by talking about how American policymakers view globalization, specifically if she thinks the so-called 1% are divesting themselves of the U.S. and looking for profit elsewhere. Take a look.
I think what's very unfortunate is that the way the leadership in this country has financed this shift is basically by shifting enormous capital out of middle-class households and out of the sovereign governments, federal, state, and local. I call it the financial coup d'etat because I think a lot of that movement, Erin, was illegal. So if you come to my blog, you can read a post called Financial Coup d'etat, or I have an online book called Dylan Reed and the Aristocracy of Stock Profits. I think they believe if they didn't globalize, that ultimately America would be left behind. And so they basically, and this happened in Europe too, they looked at their balance sheet and said, we're not going to finance retirements. We're going to take all the retirement capital and instead build forward. And that is, unfortunately, for the American middle class, what has happened. If you're in the American middle class, what you need to do is look at the shift and say, okay, there's opportunity in this shift. I need to let go of the past, and I need to try and shift with the opportunity.
Alrighty, now I want to move on because the Uruguay round of GATT and the subsequent WTO, it set in motion a framework for today's globalized world. Now, looking back, were these positive developments for most citizens, in your opinion?
I think they were negative for most. I think if I could encourage your listeners to do one thing, it would be to watch Sir James Goldsmith's interview with Charlie Rose in 1994. Sir James Goldsmith came to the United States and tried to persuade Congress not to pass the Uruguay round of GATT, and said it would be simply horrible in many respects, including for people, labor in the developed world. And I think to this day, it's one of the best single descriptions of the economy that you could find. Sir James Goldsmith with Charlie Rose in 1994, and it's as prescient today as it was then.
I have to check it out as well. Thank you for that. Now, what are the implications of the shift to a globalized economy for the U.S., European, and developed economies' middle classes?
Well, I think there are some who would argue the middle class is growing in the areas that are receiving reinvestment. So in North America, if you're in one of the economies that's receiving the reinvestment, the middle class is doing reasonably well. If you're in one of the areas around the world, the emerging markets, so in China, the middle class is growing. So I would say that from the whole global phenomena, the middle class as a size is probably growing. In North America, it's shrinking. If you look at what is happening to household income, it's been declining in real terms. And I think, my expectation is that the automation, which is expected, robotics and different kinds of automation, particularly the integration of artificial intelligence, is going to significantly reduce current employment. So if you look at the current jobs in the economy, I think, almost half of those jobs in the next 10 to 20 years are going to be automated, and it's going to depend on the population to shift and learn and shift to new functions.
Now, we've talked a lot on our show about how stagnant middle-class incomes have been overcome via debt accumulation that kept the economy growing. I want to ask you, what impact will the increase in household debt have on the U.S. economy going forward, if any at all?
Oh, I think it's going to have a very dampening effect. Although it depends on what happens, obviously, with the governmental policies. But we now, we've had for many, many decades, since 1980, what I call a long-term bull market in bonds. And that's meant whether bonds at the institutional level, government or corporations, or bonds or debt for individuals, because a lot of it's been financed with debt. We've had a spending party on that debt, and that's coming to an end. And this is a Tina Turner question. We can do this nice or rough. We need to convert to a world which is organized around equity, whether it's the equity of our homes or the equity of businesses. We're going to need to finance much more with equity. It's one of the reasons I'm so interested in crowdfunding and efforts to really build equity markets. So we're going to have to convert to an equity-oriented society. Interestingly enough, if we want to get to a much more equitable society and a society where we align the financial system with the environment, I think we need to go to an equity system. And I think the question is, are we going to get there in a nice way, or are we going to get there in a rough way? I think many of us are very concerned it could be rough.
That's really interesting that you bring that up. And Rodrigo Nino, he's actually a developer in Colombia, and he built his entire new building out of equity purchases by just the Bogota population just investing in this massive skyscraper. So it's interesting that you say that. That came to mind immediately. Now, I want to ask you, Catherine, how does politics play into all of this? I mean, are there big differences between political parties in the U.S. that you can point to on these issues?
Well, my experience with both the political parties is they both support centralization. And more importantly, they support the people behind the scenes who want centralization. So their circumstance is such that if they don't support and promote centralization, they're out. I'll never forget, I was in Washington. I was the Assistant Secretary of Housing in the first Bush administration. And the Secretary of HUD called in Jim Rouse and David Maxwell, who'd run a commission on housing. And he was trying to persuade them to support a new administration Republican bill, them being Democrats. And David Maxwell said to him, but, Mr. Secretary, we promoted lots of decentralization, and your bill is promoting centralization. And we thought Republicans like decentralization. What's the problem? And one of the secretary's little assistants turned to him and said, yes, but we're here now.
That's fantastic. I really like that. Catherine, I want to ask you in conclusion, where do we go from here? Basically, how do we rebalance the economy back towards middle-class wage earners without precipitating a class war?
Well, here's what we need to do. We need to build wealth. And part of what is building wealth is stopping other people from harvesting our wealth in criminal or unfair ways. And the other thing is doing things which build wealth. And part of what is happening is not just politics, it's the change in the technology. So as I said before, we all have to keep learning. But one of the things that can help tremendously, both in showing the opportunities and reducing the harvesting, is transparency. So I really support what you're doing with the Boom Bust Show. There is so much transparency that can be brought to what is happening, including to the government money. You vote for your congressman, correct? You go vote in elections every 2 years, right? Okay.
Obviously, yeah.
Why do you not get a financial statement for your congressional district that shows you the sources and uses of money and credit in your congressional district? Because here's the interesting thing. You could hold your congressman much more accountable and change what is happening, particularly the illegal stuff in the money, if you could see the numbers for your place.
Huh.
And you could also see the opportunities to re-engineer tremendous amounts of flow into the local small business and entrepreneurs. So if we can bring transparency to how the government money works, particularly for the place we drive around and see and live in, there's great opportunity. So transparency, transparency, transparency.
That was president of Solari Incorporated and the publisher of the Solari Report, Catherine Austin Fitz. Time now for today's Big Deal. Welcome to the Big Deal. Now, in today's Big Deal, Edward Harris and I are going to discuss the importance of wage growth in kind of a different light, a different angle, if you will. Now, let's call it the tale of two counties. Fairfax County, Virginia, is just outside of the nation's capital, while McDowell County, West Virginia, sits a few hundred miles to the west. But their economic realities cannot be more different. And you can see these differences in life expectancy. Yeah, life expectancy. Now, Fairfax residents live to the ripe age of 82 years for men and 85 for women, while McDowell has the averages of 64 years for men and 73 for women. And that's about the same as Iraq. Now, Edward, what is up with this relationship, basically, between life expectancy and your income? That seems shocking to me.
Well, I think that it's not just those two, that we see it all around the United States. And interestingly, actually, in the U.S., the Washington, D.C. area is one of the areas where you have the greatest dispersion of income, so that you have a high degree of income inequality, and you see even within the Washington D.C. area this kind of dichotomy between different places in the D.C. area. And so what it shows is that more so than ever, there is a definite connection between your income and your life expectancy and other sorts of qualifications.
Do you find this more in metro areas? Like, I know Fairfax isn't necessarily metro, while it's kind of around DC. There's a lot of independent contractors for military stuff, but it's not really metro like a New York or a DC or a Chicago?
Well, I would think of Fairfax as being equivalent of, say, Westchester or
Right.
Where Englewood, New Jersey is to New York.
Just northern New Jersey kind of.
Right,
Yeah.
and then you have West Virginia, as you were saying, it's a couple hundred miles away, and that's really rural. Is the difference rural versus urban? I don't think so. Again, as I was saying, within the DC area, you see the exact same thing. So what we're seeing is a real difference between what people have in terms of their wages in one place and their life expectancy and the wages and life expectancy in another place.
Now, in Fairfax County, the haves, they enjoy steady government work, like I was mentioning before, from an emerging tech sector as well, not just that government work. Now, their median income is $107,000. Yet, on the other hand, in McDowell County, the have-nots have slowly lost their main industry, that being coal. Now, can you tell me more about the differences between the economic realities for those in Fairfax versus those in McDowell County?
This is what people are trying to work out in terms of why it is that we have these differences. Is it, education? Is it life choices?
Right.
I mean, that's a big thing. People have to say, some people smoke more, they're more overweight, they have less healthy food, and therefore you have the life choices. But which comes with which? Is it that, you have more income and therefore your life choices are altered by that pattern? Or is it that you have you're in a situation in which you have less income and you're constrained in terms of your life choices?
Right, and we do know that those from poor demographics, they tend to weigh more. They have they eat certain foods that are not as good for you. They are less likely to see doctors, smoke, et cetera, et cetera. That can't just be a coincidence as to why life expectancy is back down, no?
Right, and so the question is what do you do about this? Because there's a chicken and egg scenario there. Is the fact that these people have cultural things which are directly connected to lower life expectancy? Smoking is a perfect example of that. Is that a outcome that's predicated on their socioeconomic status, or is it the reverse, that they have lower life expectancies because they do these things and that's lowering their economic income? I think that solving that that is going to be very important in terms of what your policy prescription is going to be.
Yes, very important. It's just a matter of solving it. That's all. But Ed, as always, thank you for your insight and time. That's all for now, but you can see all segments featured in today's show on YouTube at youtube.com/boombustrT. We also love hearing from you, so please check out our Facebook page at facebook.com/boombustrT. You can also tweet at us at Erin, at EdwardNH. From all of us here at Boom Bust, thank you for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.